7.2, we're finding cube roots today. So our last lesson was finding square roots, and now we are finding cube roots. So a cube root is a number multiplied by itself and then multiplied by itself again. So for example, if I have 2 times 2 times 2, that gives me 8, which means the cube root of 8 is 2. So the cube root, we put the 3 here, and that little number here in that spot, that is called the index. So if it's a square root, technically there is a 2 there. We often don't write the 2 in there. It's understood it's a 2 if there's no number. If there's a 3 there, it's called a cube root. If there's a 4 there, then it's a 4th root, and so forth. So a perfect cube is a number that we can write like this, and it gives us a whole number answer when we take it. So just like with square roots, I would recommend making a cube root table. So you've got our x, and then we would have x cubed. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And again, I would go down to 20 or so, and I would write what the number is cubed. So 1 times 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. 3 times 3 times 3 is 27. 4 times 4 times 4 is 64. 5 times 5 times 5 is 125. 6 times 6 times 6 is 216. 7 times 7 times 7 is 343, and so forth. Because now if I want to know what the cube root of 27 is, I find 27 and I see it would be 3. So it makes my life really easy, and the longer you make that table, the easier it's going to be for you. All right, so find each cube root. So what is the cube root of 8? Well, that would be 2. What is the cube root of 27? Well, we can see that would be 3, because 3 times 3 times 3 is 27. Now, when we had square roots, we could have both a positive and a negative answer. That's not the case here, because if I do 2 times 2 times 2, it's 8. But if I do negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2, that gives me a negative 8. So it's not going to have 2 answers as a possibility. It's only going to have 1. The next one, I can take the cube root of 1, which is 1, and the cube root of 64, which is 4. The cube root of 1 is just 1. Now I have the cube root of negative 343. Well, the cube root of a positive 343 is 7, which means the cube root of a negative 343 is actually going to be a negative 7, because negative 7 times negative 7 times negative 7 gives me negative 343. And on this one, the cube root of negative 27 over 1,000, well, the cube root of 27 is 3, so that would make it a negative 3. And the cube root of 1,000, we didn't have our table extended all the way to it yet, but hopefully you did, would be 10. So it would be negative 3 over 10. When we get to the evaluate each expression, it's just like we did it with the square roots. You're just simplifying the radical portion first, and then simplify the rest of it. So I have 18 minus 4 times, what's the cube root of 8? Well, that's 2. So 4 times 2 is 8, which means I'm doing 18 minus 8, which gives me 10. The next one, I want the cube root of negative 64. Well, the cube root of a positive 64 is 4, which means this would be a negative 4. And then it says we cube it and then add 43 to it. So negative 4 cubed would be negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 4, which would be a negative 64. What do you notice? A cube root and a cube just cancel each other out. You end up with the same thing, the radicand that was underneath it. And then I add 64 plus my 43, which gives me negative 21. All right, so I have the cube root of 512. We didn't extend our table. Hopefully you have. So the cube root of 512 is actually going to be 8. So I have 5 times 8 minus my 19. Do my multiplication first, which gives me 40 minus 19, and then do that subtraction, which is 21. Sorry, my pen carries sometimes. 21. All right, and this one, the cube root of 216 is 6, so the cube root of negative 216 would be negative 6. So 2 times negative 6 is negative 12. Minus 3 was the same thing as plus a negative 3, so that would give me negative 15. Let me rewrite that since my pen decided to carry a bunch on that one. Negative 15. All right. The next three, it says to evaluate it when x is 192, which means we're going to substitute a 192 in. So that means I have 192 where my x was, divided by 4, plus Now I have the cube root of 192 divided by 3. Well, 192 divided by 4, you can use a calculator for that. That's 48. And if I do 192 divided by 3, that gives me 64, which means I have the cube root of 64. The cube root of 64, well, 4 times 4 times 4 is 64, which means I have 48 plus 4, which gives me 52. Okay, go ahead and try the next two. Pause the video and see if you can get the answers for these two on your own. All right, so we have the cube root of 8 times 64 plus 64. All right, so 8 times 64 is 512, which means I have the cube root of 512. The cube root of 512 is 8, because 8 times 8 times 8 is 512. And then I'm going to add my 64 to it, which gives me 72. And the next one, I'm doing 2 times my b. b is negative 3, minus the cube root of 9 times negative 3. So 2 times negative 3 is negative 6, minus the cube root of 9 times negative 3 is negative 27. All right, what is the cube root of negative 27? Well, 3 times 3 times 3 is 27, which means that's a negative 3. So it's minus a negative 3. Minus a negative, remember, is the same thing as plus a positive. So it's negative 6 plus 3, which gives me negative 3. All right, we have one word problem. The volume of a music box that is shaped like a cube is 512 cubic centimeters. Find the surface area of the music box. So volume is equal to of a cube. Oh, I'm not sure why my pen's acting up again. Okay, volume is equal to the side cubed. So the volume is 512. If we want to know what a side length is, then we would need to take the cube root of it, because the opposite of cubing something would be cube rooting it. So I'm going to take the cube root of 512 so that I can take the cube root of s cubed. The cube root of s cubed is just s. That's why we're taking the cube root of it. And the cube root of 512 is 8. So we know one side is 8. It now wants us to find the surface area. Well, surface area is adding up all of the side lengths, all of the areas. So a cube has 6 sides, and we need to find the area of each of those sides. Well, the area of one side is going to be 8 times 8, which is 64. So we have 64, and there are 6 sides to a cube. So we would need to do 64 times 6 to find out what the surface area would be. So that would be 384 centimeters cubed, or cubic centimeters. So first we had to find what the side length was, and then we had to figure out then what to do with that to find our surface area. All right, take a second and write your summary. I would talk about comparing square roots and cube roots. Listing your table out, I would go to 20 or so on my perfect cubes table so that I have that as my information, and I can refer back to that anytime I need to, instead of always having to try to pull my calculator out and refiguring it out. All right, if there's anything you have questions on, make sure you're starring it so